It's so obvious that he's such a huge American political icon, but George Washington was really a fashion icon too. My name is Chloe Chapin. I am a fashion historian. I got my PhD in American Studies here at Harvard, and I just published my book that was a version of my dissertation. It's called Suitable: The Sartorial Revolution and the Fashioning of Modern Men. It is about the change in men's style between the American Revolution and the Civil War and the effects that that had on national culture and expressions of American masculinity. So I worked professionally as a costume designer for over 20 years. I was not an academic at all. I was an artist, but I found this question about men's suits that I really was so interested in, and that was what brought me back to graduate school to figure out why was it that men were dressing so similarly. One of the things that I found about the sort of uniformity of suits, the plainness of suits, that I was totally not expecting was how much of that was tied to the Founding Fathers and their idea of revolution and a new republic, new ideas of government and ideas of equality. So this idea of the Sartorial Revolution that I talk about in my book is I look at the shift in men's style between the American Revolution and the Civil War, where they went from colorful, varied, very ornamental to plain, dark, and uniform. And I call that the shift from peacocks to penguins. So there's something really big that happens in the sort of 1790 to 1800s time period. I think it has a lot to do with George Washington, actually, which was something I was really surprised to find in my research, is how impactful his clothing choices were to other American men at the time. George Washington started the Fairfax County Independent Company in 1774 along with George Mason. And when they did so, Washington picked the uniform colors. And he picked buff and blue because they were the color of the Whigs, which were the opposition political party to the Tories who were in charge at the time. So that became his uniform that he wore through the rest of the war. The Americans didn't all have a united uniform, but Washington's aides-de-camp and his lifeguards all wore the same buff and blue, which was increasingly associated with Washington. I feel like that really paved the way for the black suit that was adopted a couple of decades later. George Washington gets credit for wearing this brown wool suit for his inauguration, but we associate him mostly with black. So why is that? Well, just after his inauguration, his mother died. And black was very common for mourning dress in this period, but it was not at all considered to be a fashionable color. It was clear that people really quickly started associating black with Washington. So it became less associated with mourning and more associated with Washington. And then when Washington was president, he didn't have any models of what a president should dress like because there weren't any other ones. So he had to kind of figure it out on his own. And then what happens after that is every other president starts also dressing in black. They get their portraits painted in black suits, probably emulating Washington, whether or not they're conscious of doing that. A couple generations later, people are adopting black as kind of a marker of diplomacy or political engagement. So clearly there was a lot of ideas about dress that was happening in this time that Americans were working out and using as a way to kind of insist on American independence, American distinction, and that America should be allowed to have their own cultural traditions. And they really decided that they wanted one of the American cultural traditions to be this plain suit. You know, we sort of associate plainness with frugality or casualness or morality, but it also can be expensive and hierarchical and exclusive. Suits are probably the most important form of visual media across the world, so we should pay attention to the power that that has.